Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning. And today my guest is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. She's also a website designer. And we've been conducting a series of interviews. This is the fourth in the series. The general topic is gravity, support, and freedom. We've done two on gravity, one on support, and this is going to be about freedom. And Imogen is actually interviewing me, and so I'm going to turn it over to you. Imogen?
Great. Hi, Robert.
Hi.
So why don't we start with just telling us what the Alexander technique is?
Yeah, and I think the definition has varied slightly from podcast to podcast, but I think a useful one for this series is Alexander technique is a way to sit, stand, move, do whatever you do easily in accordance with your structure and in accordance with or in constructive response to the forces that are operating on you. Another way of saying that is it's a way to do things in the way nature intended.
Great. And I do think your definition is evolving through each of the podcasts. It's great.
Right.
So maybe before we get into freedom, the theme for today, you could do like a quick recap on gravity and support so we can kind of see how it all fits together.
Right. Well, we've gone through gravity and pointed out that gravity tends to draw us right to the center of the earth, and it's a force that in a sense, when gravity looks up at us from the center of the earth, if that's such, if you could imagine that, it sees our whole weight concentrated at our center of gravity, which, if we're standing, is a couple of inches below your navel, pretty much in the middle, front to back. So it's pulling that down to the center of the earth. That's what
Right.
gravity does. It also tends to pull individual parts of us down, and in particular, our head is a very useful one to give a little thought to, because our or not well down in the sense that our the way our head is structured, the center of gravity of our head is forward and up from its pivot point, and so our head is always being drawn in a sort of a forward nodding way. And that's what gravity does. And
Okay, and I think that's really a useful distinction because I know I used to think it was something pressing down on me, which
no,
I think is a common misconception. It's actually being pulled
no,
from below to the center of the earth, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then support. So there's gravity pulling us down,
Hmm.
but we're not at the center of the earth, and the question then is why not? And that's because there is this thing called support, which is related to a physics concept called hardness, that the surface that we're on doesn't like to get distorted by our weight and tends to repair itself, as it were. So when we create a little dent in the surface from our weight, it tends to want to push that dent back out. Kind of like those things that come around to repair hail damage on your car. That's what it would like to do. Get rid of the dent. And
Uh-huh.
that, in fact, is an upward force that operates on your feet, soles of
Or
your feet,
whatever's
or your
touching the
sits bones,
surface.
or
Yeah.
your whole body if you're lying down. Yeah. So
Right.
those are the two forces that are operating on us, and I see in a way our challenge as humans is how to function living as we do on the surface of the earth primarily, where we have one force pushing up against our feet, another force pulling us down, pulling our center of gravity down, and we also have another gravitational related force, which is the atmosphere, which is only there because of gravity, which keeps it from floating off into outer space, which is also exerting a kind of an overall very soft, gentle force on us.
Okay.
So those are the forces,
Right.
and our job is to make the best, I think our job is to make the best use of them.
Okay. Okay. So the theme for this podcast is freedom. So what do you mean by that? And how's
Well,
that going to tie in with these other concepts?
by freedom, I mean our ability to do whatever we have chosen to do in as free and easy and efficient and light, all of those words I think are useful, way as possible. So, for example, if you're walking along the sidewalk and down the street in front of your house, are you walking easily, or are you adding extra pressure? Are you pushing down with your feet? Are you pulling your shoulders in and forward? Are you tightening your neck? Are you doing things that interfere with your inherent freedom? And in a way, if you want to get an idea of what inherent freedom looks like, a perfect place to look is most kids of around 5 or 6 years old who haven't learned how to interfere with that yet. They haven't been in school and been subjected to that. Or there are a few people you can observe. Fred Astaire is my favorite. You can
Yeah.
watch him on TV anytime. And if you do watch him, turn the sound down so you don't get distracted by the plot, and just watch his movements. Watch how he moves. He is a guy who's moving freely.
Great.
And I think that's what the Alexander technique, in a way, aspires to, enabling us to move as freely as we can in this world of these forces I just described, and in accordance with our physical structure.
Right, I totally agree. So, how would you see the Alexander technique's role in this?
Well, in terms of the one that I think is most familiar to Alexander teachers and students is the one I just mentioned, the effect of gravity on your head, which tends to encourage a tilt forward, which is just nicely counterbalanced in a free state. It's just nicely counterbalanced by the muscles in the back and sides of your neck. But a way to prevent that from happening is to tighten your neck, to tense your neck.
Right.
And that will take away a lot of the freedom of your head on top of your spine. That's a really quick way to, in a way, experiment with decreasing the amount of freedom you've got. Another area we touched on one of the earlier podcasts was the atmospheric pressure that is surrounds us, which tends to, if we're using it well, it enables us to allow air to come into our lungs without making any conscious effort to do so, because of the vacuum that's created when the diaphragm drops and the ribs expand. That only works because there is this atmospheric pressure, which is kind of a free gift from nature, which just brings the air right in for us, so we don't have to gasp for breath. And a nice way to interfere with that, if you want to test it, is start gasping for breath or holding your torso rigidly or things like that.
Yeah, so the Alexander technique's role would be help us to not do those
Not do those
interfering things and
Exactly.
free up the ribs.
Right,
help,
and to just free up the whole mechanism. Yeah, so, and then the force of support that I've talked about a lot in the last podcast. Support has to be transmitted up through the soles of your feet to the rest of your body, and one way of looking at that is your feet and your legs are kind of the transmission system. And if they are unduly tensing, they're going to interfere with that transmission. They're going to distort it. We're going to get an inaccurate idea of what's actually going on. And that's going to very likely lead to even more tension. And so you can get a vicious cycle. So
Right.
all of those interferences to the effective use of these really these two forces, gravity and support, are all things that the Alexander technique is very good at dealing with, even if it doesn't explicitly talk about those forces.
Right. And I'm interested. You wrote a very nice blog post recently that talked about some of these issues, and in it you gave a couple of examples of what we might call an Alexander technique direction that people could
Sure.
try out
For the
to kind of help
support, it
make
was
the most of the support
support.
and get free. I mean, freedom too, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I mean, it's all of yeah.
Well,
So
but and even I'll just yeah that was about how to get the most out of support,
so
and
I
we
just
could talk about that first. So if support, um, if what's getting in the way of support being as useful as it can is tension, then a nice Alexander direction, and I tend to use freedom directions, which are a fairly new kind of direction. You could use negative directions, and I think you could even probably use other types of Alexander directions. But I tend to think in terms of I'm free to receive the support of the surface I'm on. So if I'm walking, I just say I'm free to receive the pavement support, or even just the earth support. Or I could localize it a bit and say my feet are free to receive it, or my feet and my legs are free to receive it.
yeah, I was very drawn to them. I was playing with them myself last week, and actually because of the positive effects on me personally playing with those directions, as I tried them with a few students last week too, and I must say they're extremely helpful. At least initially seemed very helpful. It seemed like you were talking about breathing earlier. It
Hmm.
seemed to
Hmm.
help the breathing free up. I definitely felt a sort of lengthening or
Hmm.
opening up
Hmm.
happening, which I
Hmm.
wasn't forcing in any way, or not that I could detect. That's a whole other issue. um,
Right, right.
um, and yeah, it's been very interesting to play with them in different, doing different things.
I think these are experiments that anyone listening to this
Right.
podcast could do right now. You could just stand up as you normally do and notice what that's like, and then just say to yourself, "Hey, I'm free. My feet and my legs are free to receive the support of the floor." And it's just a thought. It's not doing anything. It's an Alexander type direction where there's no doing, it's just a thought. And then you could play with throwing that thought away and see what happens. Or you could use it while walking. You could say, as I'm walking, my feet and legs are free to receive the support of the floor. Or you could say, I'm free to receive the support of the floor, and then continue walking and throw it away and notice what happens. It's
Right.
pretty easy to do.
Yeah, I think having the explanation of the support and the hardness and the making a little dent and
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
pushing back idea is it's sort of important to kind of have some sort of basic understanding of
Hmm.
before you can use them. If or that's my guess. Before you can
Yeah, I kind of
think,
like to go through that because
yeah,
it's brand new to me. And as I say, I actually was a physics major in university, and I never thought about these things. I mean, of course, so biophysics, as it were, was not really on the plate at that time very much. Now, the other area where the Alexander technique can be very helpful is in helping us utilize the gravitational force as effectively as possible. Now, I've created a whole system called Up with Gravity, which
Right.
deals explicitly with that, and I won't say much about it here. I will put a link
Yeah, no,
to
I
that
found
site.
that very effective too. I just wanted to comment that I actually found both things had a similar effect,
Yeah, I
but
think
they're
so.
working maybe in a slightly different way. But
And you can experiment with combining them or alternating between them. I mean, basically, using directions in connection with your overall center of gravity are things like um, deciding to move your center forward or backwards or whatever. Instead of quote walking unquote, move your center forward. And there's some useful images that you can use to help access that center of gravity because it's really in the middle of nowhere, unlike the surface of your feet, which are receiving
it's much easier to be aware
very
of.
easy
Yeah.
to the center of gravity is probably in the middle of an intestine or something. I mean, there's no marker there, but so images are helpful to access it, but you can use Alexander directions. You say, I'm free to move my center forward, or the image I've connected to it, or I'm free even to lift my center, and then I'm just shift into I'm free. I'm just touching on a few
Yeah.
examples, and they're all going to be outlined elsewhere, but they're basically using the Alexander technique, and in terms of breathing, hey, I'm free to breathe, which is
Hmm.
almost certainly going to cause you not to make as much effort on the in breath if you have been kind of gasping. If you have
Right.
a pattern of kind of trying to suck in air, saying I'm free to breathe is very likely to influence that in a desirable way. So to
Right.
me, the Alexander technique is the perfect way to take advantage both of our structure and of the forces that are operating on it that we experience in the real world. And I would like to say a little bit on the structure point. Periodically, people say things like, "Well, we never really got it right in terms of getting upright.
Mm.
We're not really designed to stand on 2 feet, and so that's why we have so much back pain and neck pain and so on." I actually very strongly disagree with that. I think our structure is amazingly adapted to these adapted to deal with these forces that are operating on us. I mean, for example, the fact that our head is way up at the top and balanced on top of the spine and is being rota- drawn forward in a rotational sense by gravity, that gravity is itself creating an upward flow through your whole body because your head releases forward and then your back lengthens and widens as a
Hmm.
result of that. So the question is not so much whether our structure is good or bad. I think it's excellent, but
Right. I agree.
but it does require standing up does require more attention in a sense than being on all fours to function well. I think we need to, and I think the reason it requires more attention, I think for small children, they're fine, but if you start to develop a pattern of tensing, perhaps in your legs, perhaps in your neck, that throws everything off a bit. I think the fundamental problem we have with that is it doesn't self-correct. It doesn't
Right.
self-correct. It can be corrected, as it were, but that requires conscious thought and
And that's what the Alexander technique can teach you to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the Alexander technique is all about. Conscious thought, conscious self-direction. And that's what's required to change a habit. For example, you turn an ankle and you develop a pattern of favoring one leg, and after a few weeks the ankle is fine, but that pattern has taken hold a bit. Might be very subtle, but it's there. There's no way that that's going to change on its own. It's going to require you, perhaps with the help of somebody pointing it out to you in a way that you can sense, you intervening to change that pattern. It's not going to change on its own.
Right.
So that's kind of my. I think freedom is really using our structure and using the forces that are operating on us to our best advantage. And I want to make just one more tiny final point.
Go ahead.
I talk about these forces, support and gravity, but in physics, force equals energy. It's the same thing. It's another word for the same thing. And actually, what's going on is that we are getting an amazing amount of free energy from the system.
That's an interesting way.
Yeah, the system being the Earth and all of its components. We are getting this for free 24/7, and it's really up to us whether we want to accept it and use it or whether we want to get in its way and create problems. It's just like, air is there, and it'll come right into our lungs if we leave ourselves alone. That's a free gift. That's work to get it in there, and some of that work is just done by gravity indirectly.
Right.
So that's what I see our fundamental job is, and that's why I think the Alexander technique is a fantastic way to deal with these issues. And I guess I've just focused on the forces more than perhaps most teachers do, but I don't think there's anything about this that doesn't fit in beautifully to the Alexander technique.
Great. Now that seems like a wonderful place to finish up, unless you have
I'm done.
Of wisdom. Well, really fascinating. Thank you, Robert. I'm going to just turn it back over to you to just close the podcast, I guess.
Sure. And my guest and interviewer today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander technique teacher and website designer in Wilmington, Delaware. And once again, Imogen, thank you so much for doing all of these.
Thank you.